At the Sunday family dinner, I watched my husband empty a clear vial of liquid into my bowl of seafood gumbo. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face blank. I bided my time, and when the family got distracted by a shattered wine glass, I swiftly switched my bowl with my mother-in-law. Exactly 10 minutes later, the dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you ever had to outsmart the people who were supposed to protect you. My name is Nia. I am 33 years old, and until that Sunday evening, I was the designated punching bag of my husband's family. Growing up, I learned that Sunday dinner in an African American household was supposed to be a sanctuary, but in Jamal's family, it was a battlefield, and I was the primary target. I played the role of the quiet, obedient wife who worked from home doing what they dismissively called basic bookkeeping. They loved to remind me of my place. On this Sunday, the air in our home was thick with the spicy aroma of seafood gumbo. I had spent 6 exhaustive hours in the kitchen meticulously preparing a dark, heavy roux from scratch. I stepped back into the kitchen to grab linen napkins. As I reached for the drawer, I caught movement in the reflection of the dark microwave door. Jamal was standing by the kitchen island, his back turned to me. He was hovering over the bowls I had just ladled. I froze. My breath hitched as I watched him pull a small vial from his suit pocket. He swiftly emptied the entire contents into my bowl. He gave the gumbo a quick stir with a silver spoon, wiping the rim clean so it looked undisturbed. My heart slammed against my ribs. My husband was spiking my food. Panic urged me to scream to confront him, but survival instinct is a funny thing. It slows time down. It sharpens your mind. I needed undeniable proof, and more importantly, I needed to know exactly what his sick game was. I took a deep breath, forcing my racing heart rate to steady. I waited in the shadows until Jamal turned around and carried the 2 bowls into the dining room. I grabbed the folded napkins and followed him out, my face a perfect mask of pleasant submission. The long dining room table was lavishly set. Shirley sat at the head of the table, her eyes tracking my every move with familiar disdain. Dominique was snapping photos of the dinner spread for her social media pages, ensuring her fake luxury lifestyle was well documented. My spiked bowl sat steaming at my place setting. Shirley's safe bowl sat directly to my left. I needed a major distraction. I walked toward the table holding a crystal wine glass in one hand and the linen napkins in the other. As I reached the edge of the woven rug, I purposefully caught the heel of my shoe on the thick fabric. I lunged forward, letting out a sharp gasp, and hurled the heavy wine glass directly toward the hardwood floor behind Darius's chair. The crystal shattered with a deafening crash, sending sharp shards flying in every direction across the room. The sound was incredibly sharp, instantly halting the loud, arrogant conversations. As Jamal, Darius, and Dominique all leaned over the side of the table to inspect the damage, complaining loudly about my lack of grace, I moved with lightning speed. The adrenaline pumping through my veins made my hands completely steady. In one fluid motion, I slid my poisoned bowl of gumbo over to Shirley's placemat and pulled her untainted bowl directly in front of my own chair. The bowls were identical. No one saw a single thing. Jamal gave me a look of deep irritation, but beneath his scowl, I saw a flicker of nervous anticipation. His hands were shaking. Once the broken glass was completely cleared, we finally took our seats. I picked up my polished silver spoon and began to carefully eat the safe gumbo, making a grand show of enjoying every single warm bite. Jamal watched me intently from across the table, taking incredibly slow sips of his ice water. I met his gaze directly and smiled, delivering a perfectly docile, obedient smile. She chewed loudly, swallowing the rich broth, blissfully oblivious to the horrifying fact that she had just consumed whatever poison her golden child son had intended for me. It was a poetic, terrifying justice that I watched unfold in absolute silence. She wiped her mouth with a fine linen napkin and glared directly at me across the heavy oak table. "You are incredibly lucky Jamal pays the heavy mortgage on this beautiful house, Nia," Shirley said, pointing her dripping spoon at me while she chewed her second bite. "God knows your little tax prep hobby barely covers the electric bill around here." I kept my face perfectly neutral, taking another quiet bite of my food. It was the exact same old song. For 8 long years, I had let them believe I was just a struggling freelance bookkeeper making pennies. I had let them build this elaborate fantasy where Jamal was the wealthy provider, the undisputed king of the castle. In reality, Jamal was a massively failing investment broker drowning in terrible debt. I knew this because I was not a basic bookkeeper. I was the founder and CEO of a premier forensic accounting and cybersecurity firm. I tracked missing millions for massive global corporations. I knew every dark corner of Jamal's financial life, but I let Shirley enjoy her delusion for tonight. Dominique chimed in, swirling her red wine. Seriously, Nia. Darius just bought me a brand new diamond tennis bracelet yesterday. Jamal cannot even buy himself a new luxury watch because he is too busy financially supporting you. You should be grateful he puts up with your absolute lack of ambition. Darius puffed out his chest, aggressively adjusting his designer blazer. That is right. It is all about the daily hustle. You have to bring real value to the table, Nia. Jamal is carrying this whole team on his back. I just nodded, taking another quiet bite of my delicious food. Yes, Shirley, I said softly, looking around the room. I am very aware of absolutely everything Jamal brings to this table. Jamal shifted highly uncomfortably in his seat. He kept glancing at my bowl, then back up at my face, eagerly waiting for whatever dangerous substance he had used to take its toll. He was actively timing it. The conversation flowed around me, filled with their usual ridiculous boasts and passive-aggressive insults. Dominique talked endlessly about a fake luxury vacation she was planning. Darius bragged about massive car sales that I knew for a fact did not exist. Shirley continued to eagerly eat the spiked gumbo, scraping the very bottom of her bowl. I watched the clock too. 7 long minutes passed. 8 minutes, 9 minutes. Shirley was mid-sentence, boasting loudly about Jamal's latest fabricated promotion at the elite brokerage firm. He is going to be the absolute youngest vice president in the company history, she said, gesturing proudly with her hand. And when he gets that massive corner office, he is going to. Shirley suddenly stopped, her jaw locked completely open. The heavy silver spoons slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the fine china plate. Her eyes widened in sudden, absolute terror, fixating intensely on a blank space on the dining room wall. Mom, Dominique asked, pausing abruptly with her wineglass halfway to her lips. Are you okay? Shirley did not answer. Her entire body went rigidly stiff like a solid board of wood. Suddenly, her eyes rolled entirely back into her head, showing only the frightening whites. A horrible guttural choking sound violently escaped her throat. She violently convulsed her arms, thrashing wildly outward. She collapsed forward onto the dining table, her dead weight pulling the expensive lace tablecloth, shattering plates and sending half-eaten food and red wine crashing violently onto the hardwood floor. Thick white foam began to bubble rapidly at the corners of her mouth as her body continued to violently seize among the ruined Sunday dinner. Dominique let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream that echoed through the entire house, dropping to the floor in absolute shock. Darius jumped back so fast he knocked his heavy wooden dining chair completely over, yelling desperately for someone to call an ambulance immediately. But it was Jamal's deeply revealing reaction that officially sealed his permanent fate. He did not rush to his mother to perform CPR. He did not ask what was wrong. He looked directly at the empty bowl near Shirley's seizing head, then whipped his face around to stare directly at me, his eyes wide with wild, uncontainable panic. Did you eat it? Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. He grabbed the edge of the shattered table, his knuckles turning completely white. Nia, did you actually eat the gumbo? That bowl was supposed to be for you? The truth was finally out in the open. The war had officially begun, and I was going to make sure he lost absolutely everything. I sat perfectly still, watching his pathetic facade crumble into millions of jagged, irreparable pieces. The sheer volume of Jamal screaming those words seemed to suck every ounce of oxygen straight out of our high-ceilinged dining room. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of dead quiet that only happens right before a massive explosion. Shirley lay slumped across the shattered fine china. The rich dark roux of the seafood gumbo was rapidly soaking into the expensive white lace tablecloth, making it look like a massive crime scene. Thick white foam continued to bubble past Shirley's pale lips. Her body jerked with violent, unpredictable spasms that rattled the heavy oak table. Jamal remained frozen on his knees. His designer slacks were completely ruined by the spilled food and broken glass, but he did not care. His eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror as he stared up at me. He had just admitted his own guilt in front of his entire family. Dominique was the first to snap out of the collective shock. Her brain completely bypassed her brother's horrific admission and zeroed in on her favorite target. Me. She scrambled up from her chair so fast it tipped over backwards and hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack. Her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. She lunged straight across the ruined dinner spread. Her expensive high heels crunched over shattered wine glasses as she closed the distance between us. "You poisoned my mother!" Dominique shrieked at the top of her lungs. Her manicured hands shot out and grabbed the collar of my silk blouse. Her long acrylic nails dug sharply into my collarbone. "I saw you serve that bowl. You did this to her, you jealous broke witch." She yanked me forward, trying to shake me physically. For 8 years, I would have cowered. For 8 years, I would have cried and begged them to believe my innocence while they teamed up to tear me down. Not tonight. Tonight, the old Nia was officially dead. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I looked dead into Dominique's furious eyes. With slow, deliberate precision, I brought my hands up and clamped them around her wrists. I dug my thumbs hard into the sensitive pressure points on the inside of her forearms. Dominique gasped in sudden pain. Her grip instantly loosened. I calmly peeled her fingers off my ruined blouse and shoved her hands away with enough force to make her stumble backward into Darius. "Do not ever put your hands on me again, Dominique," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet. It was a tone they had never heard from me before. Darius caught his wife and puffed out his chest, trying to play the protective husband. "Hey, you do not touch my wife," Darius yelled, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "You are going to jail for this, Nia, you hear me? You are going away for a very long time." I ignored his loud, useless posturing. I reached into the pocket of my slacks and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was brilliantly illuminated in the dim dining room. I had not just been sitting there watching Shirley Seas, I had been busy. I tapped the speakerphone icon and set the volume to maximum. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's crisp professional voice echoed loudly through the chaotic dining room. Jamal's face drained of all color. He scrambled backward on the floor crab, walking away from his seizing mother as if she had suddenly caught fire. "Yes, please send an ambulance and law enforcement immediately to 428 Magnolia Estates Drive." I spoke clearly and calmly into the device, making sure my enunciation was flawless. "My mother-in-law has just collapsed at the dinner table. She is actively seizing and foaming at the mouth. And please inform the responding officers that my husband Jamal just screamed that the poisoned food she ate was actually meant for me." "I have that recorded, Mom," the dispatcher replied instantly. "Paramedics and police are en route. Stay on the line." Jamal leaped up from the floor. He was sweating profusely now. Huge beads of moisture rolled down his forehead and stained the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He lunged toward me, trying to snatch the phone from my hands, but I stepped smoothly out of his reach. "I didn't say that." Jamal screamed frantically at the phone. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving with sheer panic. "Operator, she is lying. My wife is crazy. She is mentally unstable. She has been having a psychotic break for months." He turned to Darius and Dominique, gesturing wildly with trembling hands. "Tell them. Tell the operator how sick she is. She has always been crazy. She has been paranoid and delusional. She poisoned my mother and now she is trying to frame me." It was their favorite historical narrative. Whenever Jamal messed up in our marriage, he relied on his family to gaslight me. If he stayed out all night and I questioned him, I was paranoid. When I noticed large sums of money missing from our joint checking account last year, Jamal convinced his mother and sister that I was losing my grip on reality. He told them I was making up wild accusations because my accounting business was failing and the stress was breaking my mind. They had eagerly embraced the narrative that I was a financially dependent, mentally unstable burden. Darius immediately jumped on the defense. "Yeah, operator, this woman is sick in the head," Darius yelled toward my phone. "She has been talking crazy for a whole year. She probably put bleach or something in the food because she hates this family." Dominique nodded vigorously, wiping fake tears from her cheeks. "She is a psychopath. She hates my mother because my mother knows she is a complete fraud. You need to lock her up." I stood there listening to them build their desperate web of lies. It was fascinating to watch them operate when their backs were against the wall. They were so conditioned to covering up Jamal's failures that they did it instinctively. They actually believed their loud voices and flashy clothes could alter the reality of what just happened. The 911 dispatcher remained strictly professional. "Sir, I need you to step away from the caller. Paramedics are less than 2 minutes out. Mom, is the patient still breathing?" "Yes, she is breathing, but she is completely unresponsive," I replied, keeping my eyes locked dead on Jamal. He was pacing back and forth like a trapped animal in a cage. He kept wiping his sweaty palms on his ruined slacks. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. The wail of approaching sirens pierced the night air. The sound grew rapidly louder, bouncing off the manicured houses in our elite gated community. Red and blue lights began flashing intensely through the large dining room windows, casting frantic, colorful shadows across the walls. Jamal flinched at the sound of the sirens. He looked down at the floor near the overturned chairs. I followed his gaze. I knew exactly what he was looking for. Heavy footsteps pounded up the front walkway. The front door burst open. 3 paramedics rushed into the foyer, pushing a heavy gurney equipped with emergency medical gear. 2 fully uniformed police officers followed closely behind them, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts as they surveyed the chaotic scene. "In here," Dominique shrieked dramatically, waving her arms toward the dining room. "Help her! She is dying! My crazy sister-in-law poisoned her!" The paramedics did not waste time listening to Dominique's theatrics. They rushed to the table and immediately went to work on Shirley. They carefully lifted her rigid, violently shaking body from the shattered plates and laid her flat on the hardwood floor. One paramedic began suctioning the thick foam from her airway, while another quickly established an intravenous line in her arm. "Be careful with her," Dominique yelled, hovering over the paramedics. "That is a custom designer dress she is wearing. Do not cut it." Even with her mother fighting for her life on the floor, Dominique could only think about the price tag of the clothing. It was a perfectly pathetic display of her incredibly shallow priorities. Darius stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, playing the role of the supportive, wealthy husband for the audience of police officers. Jamal had backed himself into the corner of the dining room near the large antique china cabinet. He was trying his absolute best to compose himself. He ran a trembling hand over his hair and plastered on a look of deep husbandly concern as one of the police officers approached him. "Officer, thank God you are here," Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave to sound more authoritative and calm. "It is my wife, Nia. She has been struggling with severe mental health issues. She prepared this entire dinner herself. I think she had some sort of massive break from reality and put something toxic in the food. You need to arrest her for her own safety and ours." The officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a sharp gaze, pulled out a small notepad. He did not immediately reach for his handcuffs. He looked at me standing quietly by the kitchen doorway, then looked back at Jamal. "We received a report from dispatch stating that you yelled the poisoned food was meant for your wife, sir," the officer stated flatly. "Care to explain that?" Jamal let out a condescending, forced chuckle. He leaned in slightly, trying to use his signature brotherhood charm on the officer. "Man-to-man, officer, you know how it is. She is hysterical. She misheard me in the panic. I was actually asking her if she ate the gumbo too, because I was terrified she might be poisoned next. I was trying to save her." He was incredibly smooth. A natural-born salesman selling an absolute lie. The paramedics hoisted Shirley onto the stretcher. She was finally stabilized but completely unresponsive. "We need to transport her to Atlanta General right now," the lead paramedic announced, pushing the gurney toward the front door. We need to run a full toxicology screen to find out exactly what is in her system. Dominique and Darius rushed to follow the stretcher, leaving Jamal and me alone in the dining room with the two police officers. The second officer stepped forward, joining his partner. We will need to collect samples of the food from these bowls as evidence, the second officer said, pulling on a pair of blue latex gloves. Jamal nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely, officer. Please test everything. It will prove exactly what my wife did. I watched Jamal closely. While he was speaking to the officers, he was subtly sliding his right foot backward. He was trying to blindly feel for something on the hardwood floor near the edge of the antique china cabinet. His expensive leather shoe scraped quietly against the wood. The first police officer noticed the movement. His sharp eyes tracked Jamal's leg down to the floor. The officer stepped around the shattered dining chair and looked directly at the spot Jamal was trying to reach. Jamal froze completely. The fake confident smile melted off his face instantly. The officer reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small tactical flashlight. He clicked it on and aimed the bright beam under the dark wooden overhang of the china cabinet. The light reflected off something small and glass. "Sir," the officer said, his voice dropping all pretense of polite inquiry, "we are going to need you to step entirely away from the cabinet, and we need the small empty glass vial you just tried to kick under there to hide from us." Jamal went completely pale. His skin turned the color of old ash. He looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror, knowing that his carefully constructed web of lies had just snapped around his own throat. The emergency room waiting area buzzed with the harsh hum of flickering fluorescent lights and the chaotic energy of a Sunday night in Atlanta. I sat in a stiff vinyl chair, keeping my posture completely straight and my hands folded neatly over my designer bag. A weary triage nurse had just informed me that Shirley was currently stabilized, but entirely unconscious. Her body was hooked up to a dozen machines fighting off the severe paralytic toxin she had greedily ingested at my dining table. I fully expected to see Jamal escorted through the sliding hospital doors in silver handcuffs. I anticipated a call from the precinct confirming his immediate booking. Instead, the automatic glass doors slid open, and Jamal strode into the waiting room looking impossibly smug. He was casually adjusting the tailored cuffs of his stained dress shirt. He had always possessed a terrifying ability to charm his way out of absolute disaster. He had apparently convinced the responding police officer that the glass vial actually belonged to me. He likely spun a frantic, tearful lie, claiming he was merely kicking the vial out of the way in a blind panic, so I could not destroy the evidence of my crime. His silver tongue had bought him a temporary window of freedom. He did not march into the hospital alone. Flanking his left side was Dominique, still wearing her flashy dinner party clothes and clutching her oversized handbag. On his right side walked a tall, older man carrying a sleek leather briefcase and wearing a judgmental scowl. I recognized him instantly. Dr. Sterling. He was the notorious family psychiatrist. He was a man well known in our elite community for providing highly discreet medical favors to wealthy clients who desperately needed their dirty scandals buried quickly and quietly. Darius trailed behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable, but unwilling to abandon his wife. Jamal marched directly toward my chair. He did not ask about his mother. He did not ask if Shirley was going to survive the night. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, blocking my path to the exit. His eyes were cold and calculating. "Hello, Nia," Jamal said, his voice dropping into that smooth, artificial tone he used when closing a shady investment deal. "We need to handle this situation before it gets out of hand. You have caused enough destruction for one evening." I did not stand up. I remained perfectly seated, looking up at him with absolute calm. "You spiked my food, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice loud enough for the nearby security guard to hear. "Your mother ate it. I have nothing to handle." Dr. Sterling stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of medical forms attached to a heavy wooden clipboard. He looked down his nose at me, adjusting his expensive wire-rimmed glasses. "Nia, your husband is deeply concerned about your mental state," Dr. Sterling said in a soothing, patronizing tone. "He called me on the way here. Given the traumatic events of this evening and your history of extreme paranoia, we believe you are suffering from a severe psychotic break. You are a danger to yourself and to others. Jamal snatched the clipboard from the doctor and shoved it aggressively into my lap. He tapped a manicured finger against the bottom signature line. Sign the power of attorney. Nia Jamal demanded, his voice tightening with suppressed rage. Dr. Sterling is entirely ready to sign a 5150 involuntary psychiatric hold on you right here in this waiting room. You poisoned my mother in a manic psychotic break. You tried to murder her. If you sign over full control of your business accounts and your personal savings to me right now, I will be a merciful husband. I will put you in a luxury private rehab facility instead of letting the police drag you into a filthy prison cell. I stared down at the legal documents resting on my lap. The sheer audacity of his plan was almost impressive. He wanted to lock me away in a padded room, strip me of my civil rights, and drain every single penny I owned while I was heavily medicated against my will. He thought I was weak. He thought I was the exact same timid woman he married 8 years ago. Dominique leaned over Jamal's shoulder, her face twisted into a vicious sneer. "Just sign the papers, psycho," she barked, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet hospital corridor. "Stop being so selfish. Jamal needs immediate liquidity to fix the massive mess you just made. Do you have any idea how much money it costs to handle a crisis like this? He needs your savings tonight." Darius frowned, stepping forward and grabbing Dominique's arm. "Wait a minute," Darius said, looking confused. "What liquidity? Why does Jamal need her savings right now? Shirley has premium health insurance. The hospital bill is fully covered. What kind of mess is Jamal trying to fix tonight?" Dominique yanked her arm away from her husband, glaring at him. "Shut up, Darius," she snapped viciously. "You do not know how family business works. Jamal is handling the crisis. Nia just needs to surrender her bank access so my brother can protect our family name from this insane scandal." I smiled internally. Dominique was incredibly stupid. She had just handed me the exact missing puzzle piece I needed. She had unwittingly revealed Jamal's true frantic motive. He was not trying to protect the family name. He did not care about Shirley's hospital bills. He needed immediate, untraceable cash. He needed access to what he firmly believed was my modest $100,000 business savings account to pay off a highly dangerous debt. He was running out of time, and he was willing to throw me in a mental asylum to save his own skin. I slowly picked up the wooden clipboard. Jamal's eyes lit up with greedy anticipation. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a gold-plated fountain pen, holding it out to me with a victorious smirk. "Good girl," Nia Jamal said softly, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just sign your name on the dotted line. I will take care of everything else. You just need to rest your sick mind." I took the gold pen from his outstretched hand. I looked at the signature line. Then I looked up at Dr. Sterling, who was watching me with clinical detachment. "Tell me, Dr. Sterling," I asked, my voice perfectly level. "How much is my husband paying you to falsify a psychiatric evaluation? Is it your standard $10,000 fee? Or did Jamal promise you a cut of my business accounts?" Dr. Sterling bristled, his face flushing an angry shade of red. "I am a licensed medical professional, young woman. I am evaluating your clear symptoms of dangerous hysteria. Your refusal to cooperate only proves your severe mental instability. Sign the document before I call the hospital security to restrain you." I did not sign the paper. Instead, I calmly tossed the gold fountain pen over my shoulder. It hit the linoleum floor and skittered away under a row of empty chairs. Then I tossed the heavy wooden clipboard directly at Jamal's chest, forcing him to catch it clumsily. I reached into my designer bag and pulled out my phone. I did not look at Jamal. I did not look at Dominique. I quickly typed a single prearranged text message to a specific encrypted number. The message simply said, "Execute Phase 1." "What are you doing?" Jamal demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Give me that phone, Nia. You are not calling anyone. You are legally incapacitated." He lunged forward to grab my device, but he never made it. The heavy sliding glass doors of the emergency room hissed open with explosive force. The loud sound made everyone in the waiting area turn their heads. Two massive private security contractors strode through the entrance. They were terrifyingly intimidating. Both men stood well over 6 feet tall with broad, muscular shoulders clad in tailored black suits. They wore tactical earpieces and carried a presence that commanded absolute immediate obedience. They moved with military precision, bypassing the triage desk and marching directly toward our corner of the room. Jamal froze, his hands suspended in midair. Darius took a quick step backward, bumping into a potted plant. Dominique gasped, clutching her handbag tightly against her chest. The two contractors reached my chair. They smoothly positioned themselves on either side of me, flanking me like a royal guard protecting a queen. The contractor on my right, a stern-faced man named Marcus, crossed his arms over his chest and glared down at Jamal, daring him to take another step forward. Jamal swallowed hard, taking a very cautious step back. "Who the hell are these guys? Nia?" Jamal stammered, his confident facade shattering instantly. "You cannot afford private security. What is going on?" I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles out of my silk trousers. I ignored Jamal completely. My focus was entirely on the corrupt psychiatrist standing next to him. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile that made Dr. Sterling physically flinch. "Dr. Sterling," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the stunned silence of the waiting room. "My security team just forwarded your entire offshore financial portfolio to the state medical board. We included the detailed encrypted ledgers of every single illegal kickback you have accepted over the last 10 years from elite families in this city. The board members are currently reading exactly how you falsify psychiatric holds for cash." Dr. Sterling's mouth dropped open. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. His hands began to shake so violently he nearly dropped his leather briefcase. "You are bluffing," Dr. Sterling whispered, his voice completely devoid of air. "You are just a bookkeeper. You do not have that kind of clearance." I pulled up a document on my phone and held the screen up for him to see. It was a digital copy of his most recent offshore bank transfer, complete with his routing numbers, and a hidden shell company registered in his wife's maiden name. "Are you absolutely sure you want to sign that involuntary evaluation tonight, doctor?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Because if my name goes on that psychiatric hold, your name goes on a federal indictment for medical fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The choice is entirely yours." Dr. Sterling stared at my phone screen in absolute sheer terror. He realized in that exact moment that I was not a paranoid housewife. I was a predator, and he had willingly walked directly into my trap. He did not say a single word to Jamal. He did not try to defend his medical diagnosis. He simply dropped his clipboard onto the floor, turned on his heel, and sprinted frantically toward the exit doors, pushing past a group of startled nurses. He bolted into the dark Atlanta night, running for his life. Jamal watched his hired gun flee in total shock. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Dominique stood frozen beside him, her mouth gaping open in stunned silence. The power dynamic in the room had completely violently shifted, and I was the one holding all the cards. Jamal's eyes darted frantically around the sterile waiting room. He looked at the heavy automatic doors where Dr. Sterling had just escaped. He looked at the massive security contractors standing stoically by my side. He looked at Darius, who was now staring at his own wife with deep rising suspicion about the mysterious liquidity problem. Finally, Jamal looked back at me. He looked at me as if he was seeing a total stranger. The docile, obedient woman he had financially and emotionally abused for nearly a decade was gone. In her place stood a formidable opponent who had just dismantled his entire backup plan in less than 2 minutes. Jamal's chest heaved as he stared at the sliding glass doors. The cowardly psychiatrist had vanished into the humid Atlanta night, leaving my husband completely defenseless. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine despair in Jamal's eyes. But narcissistic men like Jamal do not stay defeated for long. His despair rapidly mutated into a blind, reckless fury. He spun around to face me, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He marched toward the hospital triage desk, where the 2 responding police officers were currently taking notes from the charge nurse. Jamal pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. Officers, arrest this woman right now. Jamal yelled, his voice echoing off the sterile tiled walls of the emergency room. She just threatened a highly respected medical professional. She blackmailed Dr. Sterling and scared him away. She is a violent psychopath. She poisoned my mother, and now she is trying to intimidate witnesses. Put her in handcuffs. The officers exchanged a weary glance. The taller officer, the one who had found the glass vial under our china cabinet, stepped forward with his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt. Sir, we are conducting a thorough investigation. The officer stated, his tone perfectly neutral. We have secured the vial and the hospital is running a toxicology screen on your mother. But until we have definitive forensic results, we cannot just arrest your wife based on your emotional accusations. Jamal's face twisted into an ugly snarl. He stepped away from the officers and closed the distance between us. My two massive private security contractors instantly stepped forward to intercept him, but I raised a single hand. I gently waved my guards back. I wanted Jamal to step right into the center of the trap. I wanted him to feel powerful for one last fleeting moment. You think you are so smart, Nia, Jamal hissed, leaning in close, so only I and my security team could hear him. He smelled like nervous sweat and expensive cologne. You think chasing away one doctor changes anything? It changes absolutely nothing. My mother is lying in a coma. You served the food. You were the only one in the kitchen. There is absolutely no proof that I did anything wrong. It is your word against mine. I am a respected investment broker from a prominent family. You are a nobody. You are a basic work-from-home bookkeeper. Who do you think the police will believe? I am going to make sure you rot in a federal prison cell for the rest of your pathetic life. I let him finish his frantic, desperate rant. I let him lay out his entire miserable strategy. He was banking on my lack of evidence. He was entirely dependent on the assumption that our kitchen was a private sanctuary where his horrific crimes would remain forever hidden in the shadows. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice or try to plead my case to the lingering police officers. I simply turned my head and looked up at the wall behind the triage desk. Mounted high on the pale green wall was a massive smart television display. It was currently playing a muted local news channel, providing a stream of mindless background noise for the anxious families waiting in the hard plastic chairs. I reached into my designer bag and retrieved my smartphone. I swiped across the screen, opening a highly encrypted application that I had personally coded. I tapped the network icon and quickly scanned the available local devices. The hospital waiting room television was unsecured and easily accessible. I am not going to argue with you, Jamal, I said, my voice steady and deadly calm. I am just going to let you watch. I tapped the screen mirroring icon on my phone. The muted news broadcast on the hospital television instantly vanished. The large screen went pitch black for a split second. What are you doing now? Jamal demanded, looking up at the blank screen. Stop playing games, Nia. The black screen flickered and then erupted into brilliant crystal-clear 4K resolution. A collective gasp echoed through the emergency room waiting area. Dominique let out a sharp, startled squeak. Darius took a heavy step backward, bumping into a row of vending machines. The two police officers immediately stopped writing in their notepads and stared intently at the screen. The video playing on the massive television was a pristine, flawlessly lit overhead view of our custom kitchen island. The footage was so sharp and detailed that you could clearly see the steam rising from the two large bowls of seafood gumbo resting on the marble countertop. And standing directly over those bowls with his back turned to the camera was Jamal. The waiting room fell completely silent. The only sound was the low hum of the hospital ventilation system. We all watched in absolute quiet as the high-definition Jamal reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. We watched him pull out a small glass vial. We watched him unscrew the black cap. No. Jamal whispered, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. He took a stumbling step backward, his eyes glued to the television screen. No, no, no. That is impossible. The video zoomed in, slightly tracking his movements with terrifying precision. It showed Jamal swiftly emptying the entire contents of the glass vial directly into my specific bowl of gumbo. It captured the exact moment he picked up a polished silver spoon and gave the dark liquid a quick, thorough stir. It showed him meticulously wiping the rim of the bowl clean with a linen napkin, ensuring the poisoned dish looked completely undisturbed before he picked up both bowls and carried them toward the dining room. The video paused, freezing on a perfect high-resolution side profile of Jamal's face as he committed the ultimate act of betrayal. His expression on the screen was cold, calculating, and entirely guilty. "You thought I was just a basic bookkeeper, Jamal?" I asked, breaking the heavy silence in the room. I turned to face him, my eyes locking onto his terrified, sweating face. "I own a premier cybersecurity firm. I build digital fortresses for global corporations. Did you really think I would leave my own home unprotected?" Jamal was shaking, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. "Our entire house has been wired with hidden military-grade cameras for 3 years, Jamal." I continued, my voice ringing with total authority. "Every single room, every hallway, every entrance. And do you want to know why I installed them? It was not because I was paranoid. It was because 3 years ago I noticed $100 bills mysteriously vanishing from my purse. I installed a state-of-the-art surveillance system because I knew my supposedly wealthy, successful husband was actually a petty, pathetic thief stealing cash from his own wife. I just never imagined those same cameras would eventually catch you attempting to murder me." The two police officers did not hesitate for another second. The evidence was irrefutable. It was displayed in massive, unblinking high definition for the entire emergency room to witness. They moved forward with practiced, coordinated speed. "Jamal Wilson," the taller officer barked, reaching to his belt. He unclipped a pair of heavy silver handcuffs. The sound of the metal ratcheting open cut sharply through the air. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Jamal panicked. He violently shoved his hands deep into his pockets and backed away, shaking his head frantically. "Wait. Officer, wait. That video is fake. It is doctored. She is a computer expert. She altered the footage. You cannot arrest me for this." "Turn around now, sir," the second officer commanded, stepping to Jamal's left side and grabbing his upper arm with an iron grip. "Do not make this difficult. You are under arrest for the suspected poisoning and attempted murder of Shirley Wilson. You have the right to remain silent." They spun Jamal around forcefully, pressing him against the edge of the triage desk. The harsh metallic click of the handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists echoed through the room. Jamal let out a pathetic, whimpering sob. His knees buckled slightly, and the officers had to physically hold him upright to prevent him from collapsing onto the linoleum floor. "Darius," Jamal cried out, twisting his neck to look frantically at his brother-in-law. "Dominique, do something. Call my lawyer. Do not let them take me." Darius looked absolutely horrified. He took another step away from the arrest scene, holding his hands up in surrender. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with a man caught on camera poisoning his own mother. He looked at Jamal with pure disgust, but Dominique was an entirely different breed of delusional. She completely ignored the fact that her brother had just been caught on tape executing a lethal attack on the woman who gave birth to them. She completely bypassed the horrific reality that her mother was currently in a medically induced coma fighting for her life because of Jamal's actions. Instead, Dominique stomped forward, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the floor. She marched right up to the police officers who were actively reading Jamal his Miranda rights. She unclasped her expensive leather handbag and aggressively dug her manicured fingers inside. She pulled out a heavy metal black American Express card and thrust it triumphantly into the air like it was a magical shield. "Do not worry, Jamal," Dominique shrieked, her voice vibrating with manic, arrogant confidence. She glared at me, her eyes filled with poisonous hatred. "Darius and I will bail you out tonight. We will hire the most expensive defense attorneys in the entire state. We will crush this lying psycho in court." She waved the black card directly in my direction, her lip curling into a vicious sneer. "You think a stupid video changes anything, Nia? You are nothing. We will drain every single account. We will completely freeze this broke basic bitch out of the family money and leave her rotting on the street." I looked at Dominique waving her credit card while her brother was being dragged away in handcuffs. I looked at the absolute blind arrogance radiating from her face. They still did not understand. They still thought they held the power. They still believed they were the predators, and I was the prey. I smiled at her. It was a slow, genuine smile. The family money was a complete illusion, and they were about to find out exactly how broke they truly were. The drive back to Magnolia Estates Drive was the most peaceful 20 minutes I had experienced in 8 years. The adrenaline from the emergency room had settled into a sharp, icy focus. My phone rested on the passenger seat, lighting up every few seconds with frantic automated alerts. Jamal's arrest had already triggered a cascade of security protocols I had quietly programmed months ago. His access to our shared network was completely severed. His corporate keycards were digitally deactivated. The electronic locks on his brokerage office doors were scrambled. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car, taking deep, measured breaths of the cool night air. I knew exactly what awaited me at the house. Parasites never sleep when they smell blood in the water. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the neighborhood and coasted down the long, sweeping driveway. The massive oak trees cast heavy shadows across the manicured lawn. The crime scene tape from the earlier medical emergency had already been cleared away by the private neighborhood security patrol. But my driveway was not empty. Parked aggressively across the center of the stamped concrete, completely blocking my garage access, was a brand new cherry red Porsche. Darius. I put my car in park and stepped out onto the driveway. The motion-activated security floodlights instantly blazed to life, illuminating the wide front porch of the estate. Dominique and Darius were already there. They had beaten me home by speeding recklessly through the city, and they were actively trying to stage a hostile takeover of my property. Dominique was practically on her knees, her expensive designer dress bunched up around her thighs. She had a heavy cordless power drill in one hand and a set of professional lock-picking tools scattered across the welcome mat. She was aggressively trying to bore straight through the brass deadbolt of the front door. They had moved incredibly fast to try and lock me out, assuming Jamal's arrest meant I would be stranded and vulnerable. They wanted to secure the house to loot it for Jamal's defense fund. Darius stood over her, acting as the muscle. He was pacing back and forth, barking urgent orders at his wife to hurry up before I arrived. He stopped dead in his tracks when he heard my car door slam shut. His head whipped around. When he saw me walking up the brick pathway, his face twisted into a mask of pure, arrogant hostility. He puffed out his broad chest and marched down the marble steps, placing his large frame directly in my path. Darius was a large man who relied entirely on physical intimidation to get his way in business and in life. He stepped so close to me I could smell the stale red wine and pure panic radiating off his skin. He pointed a thick, aggressive finger inches from my nose. "You don't step foot in my brother's house, you broke fraud!" Darius bellowed, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet suburban street. "We are locking this place down. Jamal needs every single asset inside this mansion liquidated to pay for his defense attorneys. You are done here, Nia. Turn around, get back in your cheap car, and drive away before I make you leave." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I stood my ground on the bottom step and looked up into his flushed, furious face. It was almost comical how confident they were in their absolute ignorance. They had spent 8 years treating me like the hired help, completely blind to the fact that I was the one holding the keys to the entire kingdom. I reached into my heavy designer bag. I bypassed my phone and my wallet, wrapping my fingers around a thick manila envelope I had prepared months in advance. I pulled out a heavy stack of certified legal deeds and property records. I slapped the thick stack of papers forcefully against Darius's chest, making him stumble backward in surprise. "Your brother's house?" I asked, my voice dripping with lethal calm. I stepped up onto the marble porch, forcing him to retreat another step. Jamal secretly remortgaged this house to pay off his gambling debts 2 years ago. He was dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars on illegal offshore sports books every single weekend. He drained his own accounts and borrowed against the equity of this property behind my back. It went into full foreclosure 18 months ago. Darius stared at the legal documents in his hands, his eyes darting across the highlighted paragraphs and the official state seals. I did not stop walking. I moved past him and looked down at Dominique, who had frozen with the power drill still clutched in her trembling hand. I tracked the digital paper trail the moment the foreclosure notices started arriving at his office. I continued, my voice echoing sharply in the night air. I used my cybersecurity firm to create a blind holding company. I bought the bank debt for pennies on the dollar. I bought it through an LLC. I own the deed to this house. I own the land it sits on. And more importantly, I recently acquired the commercial real estate portfolio that includes your business lease. I am your landlord, Darius. Darius let out a loud, obnoxious bark of laughter. He tossed the legal documents onto the porch steps and shook his head in absolute denial. He turned away from me and leaned his heavy frame against the hood of his brand new cherry red Porsche, crossing his arms confidently. He thought he was untouchable. He believed his own fabricated hype. I own the biggest luxury car lot in Atlanta. Darius scoffed, sneering at me with absolute contempt. I move millions of dollars in exotic inventory every single month. I do not rent from anyone. I can buy this house in cash tomorrow morning just to watch you cry on the curb. You are pathetic, Nia. You are making up desperate lies because you know you are going to prison. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that cut through the humid Georgia night. I looked at the gleaming Porsche he was leaning against, and then I looked directly at Dominique. She was still kneeling on the welcome mat, but she had stopped moving entirely. You mean the car lot that hasn't paid rent in 6 months? I asked, tilting my head and locking eyes with Darius. I watched the arrogant smirk instantly vanish from his face, the one where Dominique secretly took out a $500,000 loan against your inventory. The silence on the porch was deafening. I took a step closer to Darius, ensuring he heard every single syllable of his impending financial ruin. Your wife needed cash, Darius. I explained smoothly, watching his confident posture begin to crumble. She needed to maintain the illusion of her fabulous, wealthy lifestyle for her social media followers. She needed designer bags and first-class tickets to fake luxury vacations to keep up with the women at the country club. So she forged your signature on commercial loan documents using her brother's shady financial connections to bypass the standard banking protocols. She leveraged every single exotic car on your lot. She drained the accounts dry. The bank is seizing your entire inventory at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You do not own a luxury car lot, Darius. You own a massive criminal debt. Darius stood frozen against the hood of his car. His breathing stopped completely. The reality of my words slammed into him with the force of a freight train. He slowly turned his head away from me. The muscles in his thick neck strained as he whipped his head around to look at his wife. Dominique's hands were shaking violently. The heavy power drill and her lock-picking tools slipped from her manicured fingers. They hit the stone porch with a loud, sharp clatter that echoed into the night. Every single drop of blood instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She scrambled backward on the porch, her eyes wide with sheer panic as she looked up at her husband. Darius pushed himself off the hood of the Porsche. His massive hands curled into tight, shaking fists. The veins on his forehead bulged against his dark skin. "You did what to my business?" Darius screamed. Dominique scrambled backward on the hard stone porch, her expensive handbag tumbling down the stairs and spilling lipsticks and credit cards across the driveway. Darius did not reach out to help her. He advanced on her, his massive frame trembling with a rage so visceral it seemed to suck the heat right out of the humid Georgia night. "Darius, baby, please listen to me," Dominique stammered, raising her hands in a desperate plea. "It was a temporary bridge loan. Jamal promised me he would pay it back in 30 days. He swore to me he had a guaranteed investment payout coming. I only did it to help family Darius. You know how much we needed the liquidity." Darius let out a sound that was half roar and half sob. "You mortgaged my entire inventory for your degenerate brother," Darius yelled, his voice cracking with furious disbelief. "My business. The business I built from the ground up while you were busy buying designer shoes and faking a billionaire lifestyle for Instagram. I am ruined, Dominique. The bank is going to chain the gates tomorrow morning. I am completely ruined." I did not stay to watch the rest of the domestic dispute. I had already delivered the fatal blow to their marriage and their finances. I stepped gracefully around Dominique's discarded lock-picking tools and walked up to the heavy mahogany front door of my house. I did not use a key. I placed my thumb against the newly installed biometric scanner discreetly mounted on the doorframe. The heavy internal deadbolts clicked open with a satisfying mechanical thud. I stepped inside the grand foyer and turned to face them one last time. Darius was currently demanding his car keys from Dominique, who was sobbing hysterically on the steps. "You have exactly 2 minutes to get your vehicles off my property before I have my security team tow them to the impound lot," I said, my voice projecting clearly over Dominique's pathetic crying. "And Dominique, if you ever try to break into my house again, I will press felony charges." I pushed the heavy door shut and the automatic locks engaged instantly, sealing me inside my fortress. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and went to sleep perfectly soundly for the first time in 8 long years. The next morning, the Atlanta sky was a bright, piercing blue. At exactly 9 o'clock, I was sitting comfortably in the premier downtown branch of First Horizon Trust. 30 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the bank lobby slid open. I watched them arrive through the frosted glass walls of the office I was currently occupying. It was a spectacular parade of desperation. Jamal led the pack. He looked absolutely haggard. His tailored suit from the night before was heavily wrinkled, and he smelled faintly of the holding cell where he had spent the last 12 hours. Behind him walked Shirley. I had to genuinely admire the sheer toxic willpower of the woman. She had somehow managed to wake up from a medically induced coma sign herself out of the intensive care unit against all medical advice and march directly into a bank to help her son commit financial fraud. She looked sickly pale, wearing a baggy trench coat over her hospital gown and leaning heavily on her wooden walking cane. Dominique trailed behind them, hiding her tear-swollen eyes behind massive dark sunglasses. She looked completely shattered, having clearly been abandoned by Darius. They marched straight up to the head teller's counter. Through the glass, I watched Jamal slam a stack of supposedly official documents onto the marble surface. He was speaking aggressively, waving his hands and pointing toward the executive offices. He was undoubtedly presenting his freshly forged spousal access forms, demanding immediate emergency control over all my business accounts under the guise that I was mentally incapacitated. The teller politely reviewed the paperwork and gave a crisp, professional nod. She gestured toward the executive suite at the back of the bank. Jamal practically pushed his mother and sister forward, eager to secure the cash he desperately needed. They threw open the heavy glass door to the bank manager's office, completely prepared to bully whichever bank executive was sitting behind the desk. Instead, they found me. I was sitting comfortably behind the manager's massive mahogany desk, my legs crossed, and an imported espresso resting in a porcelain cup near my fingertips. The actual bank manager, a sharply dressed man named Mr. Sterling, stood respectfully in the corner of the room holding a tablet. Jamal stopped so abruptly that Shirley bumped into his back. Dominique let out a sharp gasp, gripping the doorframe for support. "Hello, Jamal," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. "Good morning, Shirley. It is truly a medical miracle to see you on your feet so soon after your son tried to murder you over a bowl of seafood gumbo." Shirley's face twisted into a mask of pure venom. She ignored the reality of her own near-death experience entirely. Her golden child could do no wrong. She limped forcefully into the office and slammed the rubber tip of her cane violently against the hardwood floor. "We are freezing your tiny little tax prep accounts, Nia." Shirley barked, her voice raspy and weak, but still dripping with absolute malice. "You will be penniless by noon. Jamal is taking control of everything. You belong in a psychiatric ward for what you did to this family." Jamal stepped around his mother, a victorious, arrogant grin spreading across his exhausted face. He looked at the sleek laptop resting open on the desk in front of me. He confidently believed that his late-night hacking attempts, his forged documents, and his elaborate gaslighting campaign had finally cornered me. "You cannot hide anymore, Nia," Jamal sneered, placing both hands flat on the desk and leaning toward me. "The bank has already processed the emergency spousal access forms. I have full legal authorization. I am draining every single account connected to your pathetic little bookkeeping business. I am taking every penny you have saved." I did not argue. I simply reached out and turned the laptop screen around so it directly faced Jamal and his mother. The banking dashboard was open, displaying the master summary for my primary business holding account. The numbers were displayed in large, bold font right in the center of the high-definition screen. The account balance read $0.00. Jamal stared at the screen. A loud, cruel laugh erupted from his chest. It was the sound of a man who firmly believed he had just won the ultimate victory. He threw his head back and laughed, clapping his hands together. "I already got it," Jamal gloated, pointing excitedly at the screen. He turned to look at Shirley and Dominique, his eyes wide with manic triumph. "The offshore transfer I initiated last night actually worked. I bypassed her security. I drained her account before we even walked through the door. I told you I would fix this, Mom. I took all of it." He turned back to me, his smile turning vicious. "How does it feel, Naya? How does it feel to look at a zero balance? You are completely bankrupt. You have absolutely nothing left." I let his laughter fill the room. I let him bask in his imaginary victory for exactly 5 seconds before I shattered his entire reality. I reached out and gently closed the laptop. The quiet click of the lid shutting instantly silenced his laughter. "You did not drain anything, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly level and icy cold. "That account has been empty for 6 months. Jamal frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the routing numbers. I saw the tax prep deposits." "Jamal, I sold my firm, Nia Secure, 6 months ago for $65 million. I said, enunciating every single word with lethal precision. "It is all legally locked in an irrevocable trust in the Cayman Islands. You have zero marital claim. You never hacked my accounts. You never successfully forged a single banking document. I transferred the funds the moment the ink dried on the acquisition papers. The account you are looking at is a decoy account I left open just to track your pathetic, illegal attempts to steal from me." Jamal's face went completely blank. His brain short-circuited, trying to process the magnitude of the number I had just spoken. $65 million. The tiny little tax prep business he had mocked and belittled for nearly a decade was actually a premier enterprise cybersecurity firm, and he had been entirely too arrogant and ignorant to ever notice. $65 million, Shirley whispered, her grip trembling on her cane. Her eyes darted from me to her son, realizing the catastrophic miscalculation they had made. "You hid $65 million from your own husband." "I did not hide it, Shirley," I corrected her coldly. "He just never cared enough to ask what I actually did for a living. He was too busy treating me like a servant to realize he was sleeping next to a tech CEO." Jamal stumbled backward. The arrogant posture completely collapsed. His shoulders slumped and his hands began to shake violently. "But I needed that money, Nia." Jamal stammered, his voice rising in sheer panic. "I needed that cash today. You do not understand what is happening. You do not understand what I am facing." "Oh, I understand perfectly, Jamal," I said, standing up slowly from the leather chair. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer and walked around the desk to stand directly in front of him. "I understand everything." I looked deep into his terrified eyes. "But worse, I know exactly who you owe $3 million to." Jamal physically recoiled, as if I had just punched him in the chest. He let out a strangled gasp and backed up until his shoulders hit the glass wall of the office. Dominique let out a sharp cry, pressing both hands over her mouth in horror. "You owe $3 million in leveraged gambling debts to the Petrovic syndicate," I stated calmly, watching the absolute terror completely consume him. "I know you used Dominique to take out that fraudulent $500,000 loan against Darius's car lot to make your initial interest payment. I know you poisoned your own mother, hoping to use her tragic death to trigger a rapid life insurance payout to cover the rest of the debt. And I know that the Petrovic enforcers gave you exactly 48 hours to deliver the remaining $2.5 million in untraceable cash." "How do you know that?" Jamal whispered, his eyes wide and unblinking. "How could you possibly know about Petrovic?" "Because I am a cybersecurity expert, Jamal." I smiled a cold, merciless smile. "I have had full backdoor access to your encrypted phone, your emails, and your offshore betting accounts for over a year. I watched you dig your own grave. I watched you steal. I watched you scheme. And I watched you panic when the syndicate told you they were coming to collect. The bank manager, Mr. Sterling, finally stepped forward. He tapped the screen of his tablet and looked directly at Jamal. Sir, your forged spousal access request has been automatically forwarded to the Federal Fraud Division as per banking regulations. Your personal accounts here are now officially frozen pending investigation. Jamal's knees buckled. He slid down the glass wall and hit the floor hard, sitting in a pathetic heap in his wrinkled suit. He grabbed his hair and began pulling at it violently, rocking back and forth. They are going to kill me. Jamal sobbed openly, completely broken in front of his mother and sister. The syndicate is going to kill me, Nia. You have to help me. You have $65 million. You can pay them off right now. You can save my life. Please, Nia, please. Shirley dropped her cane and fell to her knees beside her son, grabbing his shoulders. Nia, you have to pay the debt. Shirley cried, looking up at me with desperate tears streaming down her pale face. He is your husband. You have the money. You cannot let them murder my boy. Pay the men, Nia. I looked down at the two of them kneeling on the bank floor. For 8 years they had made my life a living nightmare. They had gaslighted me, stolen from me, emotionally abused me, and literally tried to murder me. And now, when the consequences of their own horrific actions had finally arrived to collect, they were begging me to save them. I reached down and picked up my espresso cup from the desk. I took a final slow sip, savoring the rich, bitter flavor. I am not your bank, Jamal. I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. And I am no longer your wife. Your 48-hour deadline expires tonight. I suggest you start running. I turned away from them, leaving the three of them sobbing on the floor of the bank manager's office. I pushed open the glass door and walked out into the bright, beautiful Atlanta morning. I had $65 million, a clear conscience, and a brand new life ahead of me. Jamal had a $3 million debt and a syndicate hit squad hunting him down. The scales of justice were finally perfectly balanced. The heavy glass doors of the bank violently smashed open behind me just as I reached the sunlit pavement. Jamal stumbled out onto the concrete, gasping for air, as if he were actively drowning. His earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic hollow shell of a man. His legs gave out entirely, and he collapsed heavily onto a green wrought-iron city bench. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with ragged, panicked breaths. Shirley and Dominique hurried out of the bank right behind him. The morning commuters were already starting to stare at the bizarre spectacle of a woman in a hospital gown and a man in a ruined luxury suit breaking down on the sidewalk. Jamal looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. His cocky demeanor had completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. You cannot do this to me, Nia. Jamal pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. I am your husband. We are legally married. You are legally obligated to help me fix this financial situation. You cannot just walk away with $65 million while I am in mortal danger. I stood over him, blocking his view of the street. I did not just stumble onto your little secret, Jamal. I said, my voice projecting clearly over the sounds of the downtown traffic. I laid out the exact forensic accounting trail I had meticulously completed over the past 8 months. I tracked every single digital footprint you left behind on your supposedly secure home network. I followed your encrypted wire transfers through 3 different offshore shell companies. You thought you were an absolute genius using cryptocurrency wallets to hide your tracks, but you were incredibly sloppy. I know you were originally hired to launder money for the Petrovic syndicate through your elite investment firm, but you got greedy. You thought you were smarter than a cartel. You did not just lose money on bad stocks, Jamal. You actively embezzled $3 million directly from a notorious underground syndicate. Jamal covered his ears as if hearing the truth spoken out loud would physically harm him. He curled into himself, shaking his head back and forth in frantic denial. Dominique stared at her brother in absolute horror, finally realizing the magnitude of the danger he had dragged their family into. And that is when the reality of your amateur assassination attempt finally made sense to me. I continued, crossing my arms and staring down at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. I ran a chemical analysis on the residue from the glass vial you tried to kick under the china cabinet last night. That poison was not designed to kill me. I deduced aloud, piecing together the final elements of his sinister plot for his mother and sister to hear. It was a high-grade paralytic neurotoxin. You did not want a corpse, Jamal. A dead wife triggers a massive homicide investigation and immediately freezes all marital assets during a lengthy probate process. You needed me alive, but completely incapacitated. Jamal squeezed his eyes shut, unable to look at me. You needed me locked inside a secure psychiatric ward, drooling and catatonic, so your hired gun, Dr. Sterling, could officially declare me legally incompetent, I said, laying out his entire vicious strategy. Then you could slide right in with your forged power of attorney documents, force the courts to grant you emergency spousal access, sign over my life insurance policies, and liquidate my entire business portfolio. You were willing to trap me in a permanent chemical coma just to steal my assets and save your own miserable life from the syndicate. Shirley let out a blood-curdling screech. The sheer reality of her favorite son being exposed as a cowardly, calculated monster completely shattered her fragile delusion. She refused to accept it. Her mind actively rejected the irrefutable evidence. She dropped her wooden cane onto the concrete and lunged at me. She threw her arm back, swinging her hand in a wide, vicious arc, aiming a brutal, stinging slap directly at my face. "He is a good man!" Shirley screamed, her voice raw and hysterical. "He is a respectable broker. You are a lying, manipulative fraud trying to ruin my perfect son." I did not even blink. I raised my hand and caught Shirley's bony wrist mid-air. My grip was like a steel vise, stopping her hand inches from my cheek. She gasped in sudden pain, trying to yank her arm away, but I held her firmly in place. I looked directly into her furious, desperate eyes. "He is not a good man, Shirley," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, piercing whisper. "He is a desperate, pathetic thief, and he did not just steal from the syndicate. Do you want to know where he found the initial capital to cover his massive gambling losses before he started stealing from the cartel? He embezzled the syndicate's money straight out of your precious church's pension fund, Shirley. The exact same massive retirement fund that you personally manage as the head treasurer." Shirley stopped struggling immediately. Her jaw dropped open and her eyes widened in sheer, unfiltered horror. The blood drained so rapidly from her face, I thought she might actually faint on the sidewalk. I held her wrist for one more second before shoving her arm away. "He forged your signature on the internal authorization forms," I explained, watching her entire world collapse. "He completely drained the retirement savings of every single elderly congregation member who trusted you with their life savings. When the annual independent audit happens next month, the church elders are going to find out that $3 million are missing under your direct and sole supervision. You are going to face federal prison time for grand embezzlement right alongside your perfect son." Shirley stumbled backward, clutching her chest as she struggled to breathe. Her entire identity was built on her pristine social standing within that massive congregation. The imminent public disgrace and looming federal indictment was a fate far worse than death for a woman fueled purely by pride. The heavy silence on the sidewalk was suddenly shattered by a sharp buzzing sound. Jamal's phone was vibrating violently in his ruined suit pocket. The aggressive buzzing sound seemed to echo like a death knell in the quiet morning air. He pulled the device out with trembling fingers. The caller ID displayed a blocked international number. Jamal looked at the glowing screen as if he were holding a live explosive. "Answer it," I commanded, stepping back and gesturing toward the phone. "Put it on speaker right now." Jamal swallowed hard, his thumb shaking uncontrollably as he swiped the screen and pressed the speaker icon. A heavy, deep voice with a thick Eastern European accent echoed from the small device. The voice held absolutely zero emotion, which made it entirely terrifying. "Jamal," the voice rumbled, sending a visible, violent shiver down Jamal's spine. "Your grace period is expiring. You have exactly 48 hours to deliver our $3 million. We know about the arrest. We know about the frozen accounts. We do not care about your domestic problems. If the money is not secured in our offshore account by the deadline, we will no longer accept cash. We will collect your life instead." Jamal let out a pathetic, whimpering sound, covering his mouth with his free hand. "And we will not do it quietly." The syndicate enforcer continued, his voice dropping to a menacingly low register. "We know you and your mother are attending the Black Excellence Community Gala this Saturday night. It is the social event of your season. We will be attending as well to collect our debt in front of your entire elite circle. Do not disappoint us again, Jamal." The line went dead with a sharp click. Jamal stared at the blank screen of his phone, his entire body trembling violently. The Black Excellence Community Gala was the most prestigious high-profile charity event in the state of Georgia. Every major politician, wealthy business owner, and prominent socialite would be in attendance. The threat was explicit. The syndicate was not just going to murder him. They were going to slaughter him in front of the very people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. I looked at the three of them standing broken and terrified on the sunlit sidewalk. They had spent 8 years treating me like absolute garbage, entirely convinced I was too weak and too dependent to ever fight back. Now they were staring down the barrel of total financial ruin, federal prison time, and an imminent syndicate execution. I adjusted the strap of my designer bag on my shoulder and gave them a final dismissive glance. I turned my back on their weeping and walked toward my waiting car, leaving them to face the devastating reality of their 48-hour deadline. I pulled my car into the steady flow of downtown traffic, leaving the three of them to suffocate under the crushing weight of their own actions. The adrenaline from the bank encounter hummed pleasantly in my veins, but I knew the war was far from over. Cornered animals are always the most dangerous, and my husband's family had just realized they were trapped in a burning building with no exits. Within 2 hours, my phone began ringing continuously. The caller ID flashed names of prominent women from Shirley's elite church prayer circle and wives of influential city councilmen. I answered the fourth call. It was Sister Margaret, the head of the congregation's hospitality committee and Shirley's oldest friend. She demanded to know if the horrific rumors flying around the community were true. Shirley and Dominique had wasted absolutely no time. While Jamal was busy panicking about his impending execution, they had immediately shifted into crisis management mode by doing what they did best. They weaponized their social standing. Shirley had marched straight from the bank to the church rectory. She sat in Pastor Miller's office crying theatrical tears and claiming that I had suffered a massive drug-induced psychotic break. She spun a wild, fantastical tale, stating I was severely addicted to illicit narcotics and had attempted to poison the entire family in a violent, paranoid rage. She told the elders that Jamal was a saint who was desperately trying to get me institutionalized for my own safety. Dominique backed her up instantly, taking the smear campaign digital. She posted a tearful, vaguely worded video to her thousands of social media followers about surviving a violent, unhinged family member. She claimed she was living in a nightmare, hiding from a psychopath who had manipulated her brother. They were actively hitting the community hard, spreading vicious rumors to pastors, society leaders, and local business owners. They were trying to completely assassinate my character, hoping the sheer force of public humiliation would invalidate my corporate trust, or force me into a massive divorce settlement just to buy their silence. They actually believed public pressure would force me to hand over the money Jamal desperately needed. I was entirely unbothered. I hung up on Sister Margaret, blocked her number, and turned my phone on silent. Let them talk. Let them dig the hole even deeper. Their desperate smear campaign was nothing more than the frantic flailing of a dying dynasty. I had far more important work to do. Back inside the absolute security of my estate, I walked directly into my home office. It was a climate-controlled room, dominated by a massive curved desk and 4 high-definition monitors. This was my command center. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and cracked my knuckles. I spent the next 6 hours finalizing my forensic dossier. The digital trail Jamal left behind was incredibly sloppy, but Dominique's financial footprint was downright laughable. I pulled up the encrypted ledgers I had retrieved from Jamal's hidden server. I needed to trace exactly where Dominique's $500,000 fraud fit into the larger picture. I cross-referenced the dates of the stolen church pension funds with the deposits made into Darius's luxury car dealership. The realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. Jamal did not just steal from the church, he used his sister to launder the stolen cash. Dominique had funneled the embezzled church money straight through Darius's dealership under the guise of inventory acquisitions and phantom marketing expenses. She created fake invoices for high-end vehicle detailing, international shipping fees, and bogus consultation services. Once the church money was washed clean through the dealership's legitimate corporate accounts, she bled the funds dry into her own private offshore accounts. But the most pathetic part was what she did with the money. She did not invest it. She did not save it for her children. She blew every single cent trying to maintain her untouchable golden child image. I tracked her purchase history to a notorious international black market dealer. All her limited edition designer bags, her diamond tennis bracelets, her exclusive red carpet gowns, they were all incredibly high-quality fakes. She was funneling stolen church funds to buy counterfeit luxury goods just to keep up with the women at the country club. She was a complete fraud, drowning in cubic zirconia and fake leather while actively stealing from elderly pensioners. The sun had completely set when the perimeter alarm on my security panel softly chimed. Someone had bypassed the main neighborhood gate and was walking up my long driveway. I pulled up the external camera feed. It was Darius. He was alone. He was not driving his cherry red Porsche. He had walked here in the dark through the wooded path behind the property, trying to remain entirely unseen. I walked to the front door and opened it before he could even raise his hand to knock. He looked absolutely destroyed. His broad shoulders were slumped, his designer clothes were rumpled, and the aggressive bluster that usually defined his entire personality was completely gone. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn to the ground. "Naya, let me in." Darius pleaded, his voice rough and defeated. "Please, I need to talk to you." I stepped aside and let him enter the foyer. He did not try to physically intimidate me this time. He practically collapsed onto the velvet bench near the coat rack, burying his face in his massive hands. "She ruined me, Nia," Darius whispered, his voice shaking with genuine despair. "I spent the whole day tearing through the dealership's accounting files. It is all gone. Everything. Dominique took out loans against cars we did not even own yet. She forged my signature on everything. The bank called me this afternoon. They are filing federal fraud charges. I am going to lose my business, my house, and my freedom. I beg you, Nia, you own the lease. You have the money. Please give me my business back. I had absolutely nothing to do with what Jamal did to your food." I leaned against the wall, watching him break down. I did not feel an ounce of pity. "You ignored your wife's obvious theft because you enjoyed the fake lifestyle she provided Darius," I stated coldly. "You loved driving expensive cars and pretending you were a king. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when your name is on the fraudulent loan documents." Darius looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "I will do anything." I walked over to the console table and picked up a thick file folder, dropping it directly into his lap. "I want you to read that," I commanded. "It contains the exact paper trail proving Dominique laundered stolen church pension funds through your dealership. It proves she is an active co-conspirator in Jamal's $3 million embezzlement scheme." Darius stared at the papers, his jaw dropping, as he read the undeniable proof of his wife's massive criminal enterprise. "She is going to federal prison," he whispered in absolute horror. "And so are you, unless you do exactly what I say," I replied, my voice hard and unyielding. "You have a very simple choice to make right now, Darius. Stand with your fraudulent wife and go to federal prison, or help me at the gala and keep your freedom." Darius swallowed hard, clutching the file folder tightly against his chest. "What do you need me to do at the gala?" "I need you to be my inside man," I said. "I need you to ensure Jamal and Shirley do not leave the building before the Petrovic Syndicate arrives. You are going to help me lock all the doors from the inside." Darius did not even hesitate. He nodded, his eyes wide with terrified compliance. "I will do it. I will do whatever you want. Just please keep me out of prison." I opened the front door, gesturing for him to leave. "Go back to your wife, Darius. Pretend everything is perfectly fine. Pretend you are still fighting for her. Do not breathe a single word of this to anyone. If you betray me, I will send this file directly to the FBI myself." He hurried out into the dark night, a broken, obedient pawn in my game. I locked the door behind him, feeling a deep, satisfying sense of control. The chessboard was set, and I had removed their only remaining knight. The next morning, the heavy brass mail slot on my front door rattled loudly. I walked into the foyer and picked up a thick, rigid envelope from the welcome mat. It was made of expensive, heavy cardstock, deep black with gold foil lettering. I instantly recognized the prestigious branding. It was an official invitation to the Black Excellence Community Gala. I slid my finger under the wax seal and pulled out the elegant invitation card. But the formal printed text was not what caught my attention. Slipped neatly inside the envelope was a handwritten piece of hotel stationery. I recognized Jamal's frantic, messy handwriting immediately. The note was short, desperate, and explicitly dangerous. "Show up, sign the transfer papers, or I tell the syndicate you have their money." I read the note twice. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Jamal was completely backed into a corner, and now he was trying to use a brutal underground cartel as his personal attack dog. He actually thought he could redirect the syndicate's violent wrath onto me by convincing them I was holding their stolen millions. He thought this threat would terrify me into submission. He was dead wrong. I was not afraid of the syndicate. I was counting on them. I walked back into my home office and placed the black and gold invitation perfectly in the center of my desk. I pulled out my secure phone and began typing a new series of encrypted commands. The gala was going to be the most spectacular, highly publicized event of the decade, and Jamal had just guaranteed that I would be the guest of honor. Friday morning arrived with the sharp precision of a ticking clock. I sat at the massive marble conference table in my private home office, perfectly composed and entirely focused. Across from me sat my lead corporate attorney and special agent Marcus Vance, an incredibly sharp plainclothes operative from the Federal Financial Crimes Division. Agent Vance had spent the last 5 years of his career attempting to dismantle the Petrovic syndicate's domestic money laundering operations. He had hit a brick wall at every turn until my encrypted email landed in his secure inbox late Thursday night. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out 3 heavy brushed steel hard drives. I placed them deliberately in the center of the marble table. The metallic clink echoed in the quiet room. "Everything you need is on those drives, Agent Vance." I stated, my voice brisk and businesslike. Drive A contains the complete forensic accounting of the $3 million my estranged husband embezzled from his mother's church pension fund. Drive B contains the undeniable proof of how my sister-in-law Dominique funneled those exact stolen funds through her husband's luxury car dealership using fabricated inventory invoices. Drive C is the grand prize. It maps the exact offshore routing numbers, cryptocurrency wallets, and digital backdoors the Petrovic syndicate utilizes to wash their illicit cash. Agent Vance stared at the drives as if they were made of solid gold. He slowly shook his head, picking up the third drive with careful reverence. "We have had entire teams of federal forensic accountants hunting for these specific offshore routing numbers for over a decade," he said, his voice filled with quiet disbelief. "You mapped an international cartel's entire financial shadow network from a home office in Atlanta." I smiled a thin, razor-sharp smile. Jamal brought a very dangerous virus into my personal ecosystem. I simply isolated the pathogen, traced its origin, and neutralized the threat. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool marble. "But we have a very specific timeline, Agent Vance." Jamal invited the Petrovic enforcers to the Black Excellence Community Gala tomorrow night. He plans to corner me there and force me to sign over my corporate trust to pay his debt under the immediate threat of cartel violence. My attorney handed a thick stack of legal documents to the federal agent. "My client has secured total and absolute legal immunity for providing this intelligence," my attorney stated firmly. "She is an innocent spouse who uncovered a massive criminal conspiracy and immediately reported it to the proper federal authorities. We require your absolute assurance that her physical safety will not be compromised during the planned takedown." "You have my word," Agent Vance said, sliding the hard drives into a secure evidence case. "We are not going to wait for the syndicate to make a move. We are initiating a synchronized mass arrest. We already have 20 undercover agents infiltrating the gala venue. We have replaced half the catering staff, the valet team, and the private security detail with federal operatives. The entire perimeter will be locked down by 8 o'clock. When Jamal, Dominique, and Shirley step into that ballroom, they will be completely surrounded by federal agents. We will take down the embezzling family and the cartel enforcers all at exactly the same time. I nodded in satisfaction. The trap was perfectly set. The steel jaws were open, and all I had to do was walk my treacherous family right into the teeth. By Saturday evening, the humid Atlanta air buzzed with an electric anticipation. The Black Excellence Community Gala was the undisputed crown jewel of the city's social calendar. It was a night of high-fashion, massive charitable donations and ruthless networking. For years, Jamal and his mother had desperately clawed for an invitation to this specific event. They believed attending this gala would permanently cement their status among the city's true elite. I stood in the center of my massive walk-in closet preparing for the evening. This was not just a social event, this was an execution, and I was dressing for the occasion. I slipped into a custom-made floor-length emerald green silk gown. The fabric moved like liquid mercury, catching the light with every subtle shift of my body. It was a masterpiece of haute couture tailored perfectly to my exact measurements. The dress was dangerous, powerful, and unapologetically expensive. I stepped into a pair of sleek black stiletto heels that gave me a commanding height advantage. I walked over to the velvet display case on my vanity and lifted a breathtaking diamond necklace. As I reached behind my neck to fasten the intricate platinum clasp, a vivid memory flashed through my mind unbidden. It was Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. I had spent 12 hours in a hot kitchen cooking a massive feast for Jamal's entire family. I was exhausted, sweating, and wearing a simple off-the-rack beige dress I had bought on clearance at a local department store. I was carefully carrying a heavy gravy boat to the dining room table. Shirley had deliberately stepped backward, bumping hard into my shoulder. The rich, dark gravy sloshed over the edge and ruined the front of my only nice dress. Dominique had burst into a high-pitched, cruel laugh. "Look at her, Shirley." Dominique had mocked, pointing her manicured finger at my stained chest. Even when she tries to dress up, she still ends up looking exactly like the hired help. Shirley had smiled her signature condescending smirk. "Do not cry, Nia." Shirley had chided loudly, ensuring the entire extended family heard her. "I have some old church clothes I was going to donate to the shelter. I will bring them over tomorrow so you do not embarrass my son the next time he takes you out in public." I remembered looking at Jamal, begging him silently to defend me, to say absolutely anything to protect his wife. He had simply looked away, taking a slow sip of his bourbon and letting them tear me down to the studs. They had spent years mocking my clothes, my shoes, my modest ambitions, and my quiet demeanor. They had viewed my kindness as weakness and my patience as stupidity. I snapped the diamond clasp shut. The heavy jewels rested against my collarbone, cold and brilliant. I applied a slash of deep crimson lipstick, leaning close to the mirror to inspect my reflection. The tired, compliant woman in the stained beige dress was dead. The woman staring back at me now looked like absolute royalty. I was a $65 million tech CEO, a master strategist, and the architect of their impending destruction. I grabbed my clutch and walked out the front door. A sleek, heavily armored black Maybach idled smoothly in my circular driveway. The vehicle was part of my newly acquired private security protocol. The driver, a massive man with an earpiece and tactical training, opened the heavy insulated door for me. I slid into the plush leather interior, the thick glass instantly silencing the sounds of the outside world. The drive to the downtown gala venue was smooth and fast. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, but my heart rate remained perfectly steady. I was not walking into a trap. I was the trap. We pulled up to the Grand Museum hosting the event. The street was barricaded, blocking off normal traffic to make way for a spectacular red carpet entrance. Spotlights swept across the classical architecture of the building, and the energetic hum of a massive crowd filled the air. A sea of photographers, reporters, and society bloggers lined the velvet ropes, snapping photos of the city's wealthiest and most powerful figures arriving in their finest evening wear. My driver smoothly navigated the Maybach right up to the very front of the red carpet, perfectly positioning the vehicle in the prime drop-off zone. He stepped out and opened my door. I stepped out of the armored vehicle, and the reaction was instantaneous. The emerald silk caught the brilliant flashes of 100 cameras. The paparazzi scrambled, shouting my name, desperately trying to capture the sudden arrival of a mysterious, stunning woman dripping in flawless diamonds. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, projecting an aura of untouchable power as I glided onto the red carpet. The crowd naturally parted for me, sensing the undeniable shift in gravity. I stopped at the base of the massive marble staircase, leading up to the grand entrance of the museum. I looked up. Standing right at the top of the grand staircase, bathed in the bright glow of the event's spotlights, were Jamal, Shirley, and Dominique. They were dressed in their absolute best, attempting to project an image of generational wealth and unshakable elite status. Jamal wore a rented velvet tuxedo, his hands shoved deep into his pockets to hide his nervous trembling. Shirley leaned on a polished silver cane, wearing a gaudy sequined gown that looked desperately out of place. Dominique stood beside them, clutching a counterfeit designer bag so tightly her knuckles were white. They looked down at me from the top of the stairs. Their eyes burned with a mixture of overwhelming relief and predatory arrogance. They saw me in the expensive dress and the diamonds, and their twisted minds immediately concluded that they had won. They truly believed I had capitulated to the threat in Jamal's handwritten note. They believed I had brought the transfer papers. They believed I was walking up those stairs to hand them $65 million to save them from the syndicate. They looked down at me exactly like a pack of starving wolves watching a lamb willingly walk into a slaughterhouse. I held Jamal's gaze. I let a slow, dark, knowing smile spread across my face. I gripped my clutch, stepped onto the first marble stair, and began my ascent to deliver their absolute ruin. I glided up the marble staircase, leaving Jamal, Shirley, and Dominique staring after me in bewildered silence. The heavy mahogany doors to the grand ballroom swung open, revealing a breathtaking display of Atlanta's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in black silk and adorned with towering centerpieces of white orchids. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted filet mignon, and old money. I navigated the crowded room with practiced ease, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed my emerald gown. I found my assigned seat at a prominent table near the front, perfectly positioned for the show that was about to unfold. I accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter who caught my eye with a subtle professional nod. Agent Vance had promised me 20 undercover operatives, and looking closely at the rigid posture of the catering staff, I knew my security was absolute. I also noticed Darius standing near the main exit. He met my gaze and gave a barely perceptible nod. He had followed my instructions perfectly. The electronic locks on the main ballroom doors were engaged. No one was leaving this room. The gentle clinking of silverware faded as the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, calling the room to order. He launched into a lengthy, glowing introduction for the recipient of the annual Community Leader of the Year award. He spoke of selfless devotion, charitable works, and unwavering faith. The applause was deafening as Shirley walked onto the stage. She had ditched her walking cane, preferring to play the role of the stoic, recovering matriarch. She adjusted the microphone, her gaudy sequined gown catching the stage lights. She thanked the committee, praised her church, and expressed deep gratitude for her beautiful family. Then, right on cue, her voice trembled. She gripped the edges of the podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy benefactors, prominent politicians, and high society leaders. Her eyes locked directly onto me. She inhaled deeply, preparing to deliver the final fatal blow to my reputation. "This year has tested my faith in ways I never thought possible," Shirley announced, her voice echoing through the massive speakers. "Just 2 days ago, I was fighting for my life in the intensive care unit. I was the victim of a vicious, unprovoked attack." Gasps rippled through the elegant crowd. Pastor Miller, who was sitting at the head table, placed a comforting hand over his heart. "My own daughter-in-law, Nia, sitting right here in this room, attempted to poison me," Shirley declared, pointing an accusing finger directly at my table. The collective shock sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. Hundreds of heads snapped in my direction. The glares were immediate and condemning. "She is severely mentally ill," Shirley cried, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "A violent, drug-addicted psychopath who tried to destroy our family and steal our peace." My poor son Jamal has been trying to get her the institutional help she desperately needs. He has sacrificed his own happiness to protect this community from her unhinged behavior. The crowd began to murmur, their voices rising in a wave of outraged indignation. People at my table subtly shifted their chairs away from me, treating me like a highly dangerous threat. I did not break eye contact with Shirley. I simply sat there perfectly still, letting her weave her intricate web of lies. Suddenly, a heavy shadow fell across my table. I turned my head slowly. Jamal was standing right beside my chair. The smug arrogance had returned to his face, bolstered by the public shaming his mother was currently executing from the stage. But he was not alone. Standing directly behind him were two massive men in poorly tailored suits. Their eyes were cold, dead, and hypervigilant. They did not look at the stage or the crowd. They looked exclusively at me. The Petrovic syndicate had arrived exactly as promised. Jamal leaned down, placing both hands on the table and crowding my personal space. He slid a thick leather folio onto the silk tablecloth. "Sign the trust release, Nia." Jamal whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Do it right now. Transfer the $65 million or they take you instead. I told them you were holding their money. If you do not sign, they are going to drag you out the service exit and put a bullet in your head." I looked from the fraudulent transfer papers up to Jamal's desperate, sweating face. I glanced at the two lethal enforcers standing behind him. I did not shrink away. I did not reach for the pen. I calmly picked up my crystal flute and took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. "You brought wolves to a society dinner, Jamal?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly over the rising noise of the ballroom. "You really are a terrible broker." Jamal frowned, his confusion momentarily stalling his panic. "What are you talking about?" "Sign the papers, Nia." I set my glass down. I looked up at the sound mixing booth positioned on the second-floor balcony. I raised my right hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod. The audio engineer and operative I had personally retained flipped a series of switches on his massive soundboard. Shirley's microphone cut out mid-sentence with a harsh screech of feedback, causing the audience to wince and cover their ears. She tapped the microphone aggressively, demanding her voice be restored. But the audio failure was only the beginning. The massive high-definition LED screens flanking the stage, designed to display the gala logo, suddenly flickered. The corporate branding vanished entirely. In its place, a series of razor-sharp, high-resolution documents flashed across the massive screens for every single person in the room to see. The first image was a perfectly clear photograph of the internal bank ledger from Shirley's church pension fund. The red highlighted lines displayed a massive $3 million deficit. The next image flashed instantly. It was a signed wire transfer authorization form, matching the exact missing amount, bearing Jamal's forged signature. The crowd fell deathly silent. The murmurs of outrage against me instantly transformed into gasps of genuine horror as they processed the financial documents towering above them. Pastor Miller stood up so fast, his chair crashed backward onto the floor. He stared at the screens, recognizing his own church's financial routing numbers. Dominique, who had been sitting smugly at a VIP table near the stage, leapt to her feet. The screen changed again. This time it displayed the internal accounting records of Darius's luxury car dealership. The red lines clearly tracked $500,000 of the stolen church funds being washed through fake inventory purchases. Next to the dealership records, the screen displayed a side-by-side comparison of Dominique's extravagant designer wardrobe and the shipping receipts from an international counterfeit syndicate. The words "fraudulent purchases" flashed in bold crimson letters across her fake luxury lifestyle. Shirley gripped the wooden podium, her knuckles turning white. She stared at the massive screens displaying her absolute failure to protect her congregation's money. The devastating reality of her son's theft was now public knowledge, broadcast to every powerful figure in Atlanta. The fake tears she had cried moments ago were replaced by genuine, unadulterated terror. Jamal stared at the screens, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He spun around, looking wildly for an exit. The two Petrovic enforcers behind him realized instantly that the money was gone and their cover was blown. The target was not holding their cash. Jamal had lied to them. The lead enforcer grabbed Jamal by the collar of his velvet tuxedo, lifting him nearly off the ground. "You lied to us," the enforcer growled, reaching inside his suit jacket for his weapon. It was the exact signal the undercover agents were waiting for. Federal agents. Federal agents. A booming voice echoed through the ballroom. "Nobody move." The catering staff dropped their silver trays, drawing concealed weapons from beneath their vests. The valets guarding the side doors kicked them open, rushing in with tactical gear. Agent Marcus Vance stepped out from the shadows near the stage, his badge shining brightly under the chandelier light. The ballroom erupted into sheer pandemonium. Wealthy donors ducked beneath their silk-draped tables. Society leaders screamed and scrambled toward the exits, only to find Darius standing firm by the locked mahogany doors. "Drop your weapons and put your hands on your heads," Agent Vance commanded, pointing his firearm directly at the two syndicate enforcers holding Jamal. The enforcers, vastly outnumbered and surrounded by highly trained federal operatives, slowly released Jamal. They raised their hands in surrender, tossing their weapons onto the carpet. Jamal dropped to his knees on the ballroom floor, sobbing hysterically as an agent slammed heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Agent Vance marched straight up the stage stairs. Shirley was completely frozen, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her public destruction. "Turn around, ma'am," Agent Vance ordered, grabbing her wrist and spinning her toward the podium. Shirley screamed as the cold metal cuffs clamped around her wrists. Across the room, two female agents intercepted Dominique as she tried to sprint toward the kitchen. She kicked and thrashed her counterfeit diamond bracelet, snagging on the agent's tactical vest. "You cannot do this to me," Dominique shrieked, mascara running down her face. "I am a victim. My brother made me do it." I sat perfectly still at my table, taking another calm sip of champagne. I watched the FBI dismantle the entire corrupt dynasty in less than 3 minutes. Jamal was hauled away in tears. Shirley was dragged off the stage in her sequined gown, completely humiliated in front of her beloved pastor. Dominique was hauled out screaming about her fake designer bags. Darius watched his wife being arrested, his face a mask of grim resignation. He looked across the chaotic ballroom and met my eyes. He gave me one final silent nod of gratitude before slipping out a side door, completely free from the wreckage of his marriage. The orchestra had stopped playing. The elite of Atlanta were picking themselves up off the floor, staring at the massive LED screens that still displayed the undeniable proof of the family's monumental fraud. The smear campaign was dead. Their reputation was obliterated. I set my empty champagne flute down on the table. I picked up my clutch, stood up, and smoothed the front of my emerald gown. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the absolute ruin of Jamal's life far behind me. The cool night air outside felt clean, crisp, and entirely victorious. They are the official banking records of the First Calvary Church Pension Fund. I looked out into the crowd, making direct eye contact with the victims. "Deacon Hayes, your retirement fund is entirely gone. Councilman Davis, the community outreach grant you sponsored was wired to an offshore account last month." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Elderly church members began to weep. Prominent business owners shouted in absolute fury, pointing fingers at Shirley, who was now physically shrinking behind the podium. But Jamal did not act alone. I continued, raising my voice to cut through the mounting outrage. The screen changed again. This time it displayed the internal accounting records of Darius's luxury car dealership. The red lines clearly tracked $500,000 of the stolen church funds being washed through fake inventory purchases. Next to the dealership records, the screen displayed a side-by-side comparison of Dominique's extravagant designer wardrobe and the shipping receipts from an international counterfeit syndicate. Dominique, who had been sitting smugly at a VIP table near the stage, leapt to her feet. The realization that her entire fake lifestyle was being broadcast to the city's elite broke her completely. She let out a piercing, guttural scream. She hiked up her expensive gown and rushed the stage, frantically ripping at the heavy black cables taped to the floor. She was desperately trying to unplug the monitors, her perfectly manicured nails breaking, as she clawed at the electrical cords. It was a pathetic, useless display of a woman losing her mind. "Stop the screens!" Dominique shrieked, mascara running down her face. "Turn them off! This is a lie! She is a liar!" Suddenly, Darius stepped out from the shadows near the edge of the stage. He did not look angry. He looked entirely broken but absolutely resolute. He walked up the stairs, ignoring his wife's frantic scrambling on the floor. He approached me and held out his hand for the microphone. I handed it to him, stepping back to let him finish what he had started. Darius looked out at the sea of furious, betrayed faces. He took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing through the silent, horrified room. "My wife Dominique used my business to launder your stolen pension money to buy Birkin bags." Darius confessed publicly, offering himself up to save himself from federal prison. "I had no knowledge of this operation until the funds were already gone. She forged my signature and destroyed my company just to maintain an illusion." Dominique stopped pulling at the cables. She slowly looked up at her husband. The absolute betrayal registered on her face, a complete and utter destruction of her reality. She screamed in utter horror, a sound so visceral and raw that several guests in the front row actually recoiled. She collapsed onto the stage floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the illusion of her untouchable golden child status evaporated into dust. Down on the main floor, the situation was rapidly deteriorating from social ruin to imminent physical violence. The two Petrovic syndicate enforcers who had been standing behind Jamal were not looking at Dominique or Shirley. They were staring intently at the massive LED screens. The slides had advanced to the final set of documents. The screens now displayed the exact offshore routing numbers, the cryptocurrency wallets, and the digital backdoors the cartel used to wash their illicit cash. But more importantly, the documents explicitly listed the aliases and operational titles of the enforcers standing in the room. The enforcers realized in real time that they had been exposed on massive screens with their names attached to federal wire transfers in front of 500 influential witnesses and dozens of press cameras. They were completely burned. Their entire domestic operation was blown wide open, and they were currently standing next to the man responsible for the breach. The lead enforcer's eyes went flat with lethal intent. He looked at Jamal not as a debtor, but as a catastrophic liability that needed to be erased immediately. The enforcer reached inside his poorly tailored suit jacket, pulling a heavy, suppressed weapon. The second man followed suit, moving with terrifying synchronized precision. They lunged forward, moving to grab Jamal by the throat, intending to use him as a human shield to blast their way out of the ballroom and flee into the Atlanta night. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the grand ballroom did not simply open. They exploded inward with the concussive force of a battering ram. "FBI, nobody move." A voice boomed through a megaphone, vibrating the crystal chandeliers above our heads. Chaos erupted, but it lasted for exactly 1 second. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents and tactical local police officers swarmed into the opulent room from every conceivable entrance. They flooded through the main doors, poured out of the kitchen service corridors, and secured the upper VIP balconies in perfectly synchronized tactical movements. Red laser sights cut through the hazy golden light of the ballroom, instantly pinning the two Petrovic enforcers center mass. The enforcers were seasoned cartel operatives. They calculated the overwhelming odds in a fraction of a second. Realizing they were completely outgunned and thoroughly trapped, they immediately abandoned their panicked hostage. They dropped Jamal like a sack of dead weight, raised their hands high into the air, and let their heavy, suppressed weapons clatter loudly onto the polished marble floor. They surrendered without a single shot fired, knowing federal prison was vastly preferable to bleeding out on a society gala dance floor. Jamal hit the marble, gasping for air. He looked up at the surrendered assassins and then turned his head to see the tidal wave of federal windbreakers surrounding the room. Pure, blinding panic completely consumed him. He scrambled to his feet, abandoning his mother, abandoning his sister, and abandoning any lingering shred of his false dignity. He blindly shoved his way past terrified politicians and wealthy socialites, making a desperate, pathetic dash toward the rear service exit behind a towering ice sculpture. He did not get far. Shirley was standing frozen near the base of the stage stairs, entirely bewildered by the sudden militarized invasion of her precious high society event. Jamal, not looking where his frantic feet were taking him, barreled directly into her. His expensive rented leather shoe caught the thick, heavy hem of Shirley's gaudy sequined gown. There was a loud, violent tearing sound as the cheap fabric gave way. Jamal pitched forward wildly, slamming face first into a draped table covered in crystal champagne flutes. The table collapsed under his weight, sending shattered glass and expensive alcohol raining down over him. Shirley went down hard, shrieking as she hit the marble floor in a tangled, undignified mess of ruined silk and flailing limbs. Two federal agents were on them in a heartbeat. A tall agent reached down, grabbing Shirley's arm to help her up and secure her wrists for transport. Shirley absolutely snapped. The carefully constructed mask of the pious, suffering matriarch dissolved into pure, venomous, feral rage. She scrambled to her knees, grabbed her heavy, polished silver cane, and started swinging it like a wild animal. She struck the federal agent squarely in the shoulder, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Get your filthy hands off me!" Shirley shrieked, her face twisted in ugly fury. "Do you know who I am? I am a woman of God. You cannot touch me." Agent Vance stepped forward, his expression remarkably calm. He snatched the silver cane effortlessly from her frantic grip and tossed it aside. He grabbed her arms, twisting them firmly behind her back. "Shirley Hayes, you are under arrest for federal embezzlement, wire fraud, and accessory to attempted murder." Agent Vance stated, his voice carrying clearly over her incessant screaming. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it." The cold steel handcuffs bit into her wrists with a sharp metallic click. Shirley gasped, looking wildly around the room for support. Pastor Miller stood just a few feet away, watching his former star congregant spit curses like a cornered rat. The elite church members she had stolen from stared back at her with absolute unmasked disgust. Her pristine, untouchable church lady image was completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Across the room, two female federal agents cornered Dominique against a velvet-draped wall. Dominique was sobbing hysterically, hyperventilating, as the illusion of her wealthy, untouchable life disintegrated in real time in front of the very society women she had spent years trying to impress. "Please, no," Dominique wailed, holding her hands up defensively. "I have kids! It was my brother! He made me do it. I am a victim here." The agents ignored her frantic bargaining. They grabbed her arms, pulling them back to secure the cuffs. Dominique thrashes violently in absolute denial. As the agent forcefully pulled her hands behind her back, the heavy, ostentatious diamond tennis bracelet on Dominique's wrist caught the hard edge of the agent's tactical belt. The cheap counterfeit metal snapped instantly under the pressure. Hundreds of fake cubic zirconia stones scattered across the polished marble floor, bouncing and rolling around the expensive designer shoes of the city's true elite. The women Dominique had desperately tried to emulate looked down at the fake jewelry with expressions of profound pity and revulsion. "Dominique Vance, you are under arrest for federal conspiracy and international wire fraud," the agent stated, reading her rights as Dominique dropped to her knees, weeping inconsolably over the broken, scattered pieces of her fraudulent identity. Back near the shattered champagne table, Jamal was roughly hauled up from the wreckage by two massive tactical agents. His rented velvet tuxedo was soaked in alcohol, and his own terrified sweat. His lip was bleeding profusely where he had impacted the marble floor, and his perfectly groomed hair was sticking up in wild, disheveled clumps. The agents dragged him by his upper arms, marching him toward the center aisle to escort him out of the building. Their path took them directly past the edge of the stage where I was standing. I looked down at him from my elevated position. The contrast between us was absolute. I was untouched, immaculate, in my emerald silk and genuine, flawless diamonds. I stood tall, calm, and entirely victorious. He was a ruined, broken criminal being dragged away in disgrace. Jamal looked up at me. His eyes were wide with a desperate, pathetic terror. He stopped fighting the agents, dragging his heavy feet to halt right in front of the stage. "Nia, please." Jamal begged, tears streaming freely down his face, mixing with the blood on his chin. "Tell them to stop. Please, Nia. I am your husband. We are family. You cannot let them do this to me." The entire ballroom, previously buzzing with chaos, seemed to hold its collective breath. 500 of the city's most powerful African American leaders watched in dead silence, listening to the golden boy of the Hayes dynasty beg for mercy on his knees from the woman he had tried to destroy. I did not flinch. My heart rate did not elevate a single beat. I looked down at him, my face completely serene, devoid of any anger, pity, or sorrow. I had mourned the man I thought I married a long time ago. The creature begging before me was nothing more than a parasite that had finally been extracted. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the podium, making sure my voice carried clearly over the silence of the massive room. "You lost the right to call me family the second you spiked my gumbo," I stated coldly. The finality of my words struck him like a physical blow to the chest. He slumped, all the remaining fight draining out of his cowardly body. He let his head fall forward, a hollow sob escaping his throat. The federal agents jerked him roughly by the arms, continuing their relentless march toward the main mahogany doors. I stood on the stage and watched as the FBI orchestrated the ultimate public takedown. Shirley, Dominique, and Jamal were lined up together in the center aisle. They were physically stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their precious, carefully cultivated social status. The elite crowd of politicians, business tycoons, and socialites did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. Instead, they pulled out their smartphones. Hundreds of cameras began recording the walk of shame. The bright flashes illuminated their tear-stained, terrified faces, capturing their absolute ruin for all of eternity. Shirley tried desperately to hide her face behind her shoulder, but an agent firmly guided her forward, forcing her to look at the people she had betrayed. Dominique stumbled on her high heels, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, leaving a trail of fake diamonds in her wake. Jamal just stared blankly at the floor, utterly defeated and broken beyond repair. They were paraded out of the ballroom in handcuffs in front of the entire elite community they had sacrificed their souls to join. As the heavy ballroom doors swung open to the outside street, the situation escalated from local humiliation to a total media circus. The street was still packed with paparazzi society bloggers and local news crews who were initially there to cover the glamorous gala arrivals. The sudden, shocking appearance of the city's most desperate social climbers being dragged out in federal handcuffs sent the press into an absolute feeding frenzy. The camera flashes outside were blinding. Reporters shouted rapid-fire questions about stolen church pensions, cartel money, and attempted murder. The microphones were shoved into their faces, capturing every second of their devastating downfall. They were shoved roughly into the back of waiting armored federal transport vehicles. The heavy steel doors slammed shut, echoing with a loud, definitive thud, sealing the fate of their fraudulent dynasty forever. I remained standing on the stage, the undisputed victor of a war they had foolishly started. The ballroom was quiet now, the toxic infection finally excised from the room and from my life. I breathed in the clean air, stepped down from the podium, and walked gracefully toward the exit, ready to step into the bright, unburdened future I had secured for myself. The lead enforcer's hand closed around Jamal's windpipe, but he never got the chance to pull him backward. Agent Vance moved with blinding speed. He discharged his taser directly into the enforcer's chest. The massive man stiffened, convulsed, and crashed to the marble floor, taking a shrieking Jamal down with him. The second enforcer was instantly tackled by 3 heavily armored tactical officers, pinning him to the ground with a knee securely planted between his shoulder blades. The threat was neutralized in less than 10 seconds. The federal agents hauled the subdued cartel operatives up by their collars, dragging them out the side exit. Jamal lay on the floor, coughing and gasping for air, his velvet tuxedo ruined. 2 officers grabbed his arms, hoisting him roughly to his feet. He did not look at me again as they marched him out of the ballroom, joining his mother and sister in the back of the armored federal transport vehicles. The heavy mahogany doors closed, leaving a stunned, lingering silence in their wake. The red and blue police lights flashed through the tall ballroom windows, casting eerie shadows across the opulent room. The elite attendees remained rooted to their spots, unable to fully process the sheer scale of the deception they had just witnessed. Waiters and catering staff who had drawn their weapons earlier now lowered them, securing the perimeter under Agent Vance's strict command. The atmosphere was thick with disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of violation. I stepped down from the stage, smoothing the front of my emerald gown. My movements were deliberate, unhurried, and completely devoid of panic. Pastor Miller and Councilman Davis were waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. Their faces were ashen, completely drained of the arrogant self-assurance they had carried just an hour ago. Behind them, several other prominent community leaders hovered, their expressions mirroring a mixture of shame and desperate hope. Pastor Miller began, his voice shaking as he nervously adjusted his collar. "We owe you a profound apology. We sat here and listened to Shirley slander your name. We judged you. We turned our backs on you. And all this time you were trying to save us." Councilman Davis nodded vigorously, running a hand over his sweating forehead. "We thought the money was gone forever, Nia. The community center, the pensions, all of it. How did you get the financial documents? How did you know?" "I did not just get the documents, gentlemen," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "I recovered your money." They both stared at me in absolute shock. When I discovered Jamal and Shirley were laundering the church funds through Dominique's fake luxury purchases and Darius's dealership, I initiated a quiet trace on the accounts I explained. I engaged a team of forensic accountants to intercept the final wire transfer before it reached the Petrovic syndicate's offshore accounts. We froze the capital, legally routing the remaining $65 million back into a secure escrow account managed by the federal authorities. "Your pension fund is fully restored, Pastor Miller. The community outreach grant will be available by Monday morning, Councilman." Tears welled in the older pastor's eyes. He reached out, taking both of my hands in his. "You are a blessing, Nia. A true blessing to this community. We will never forget what you did for us tonight." I offered a polite nod, withdrawing my hands. "I did what was necessary, Pastor. I suggest you audit your financial committees more rigorously in the future." Exactly 1 week later, the spring air carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine across the sprawling, manicured lawn of my new estate. I stood in the circular driveway of the massive luxury home I had secretly purchased months ago under a blind trust. The property was hidden behind heavy iron gates in the most exclusive neighborhood of Buckhead, far removed from the toxic reach of the Hayes family. I held a tablet in my hand, casually scrolling through the morning news updates. The headlines were entirely dominated by the spectacular collapse of Atlanta's most corrupt dynasty. Shirley Hayes, the former queen of the city's religious elite, was officially bankrupt. The federal government had seized her primary residence, her church-affiliated properties, and every frozen bank account tied to her name. News helicopters broadcast live footage of bank representatives changing the locks on the front doors of her sprawling estate. Her designer furniture and gaudy oil paintings were being hauled out onto the lawn for federal auction. She was currently sitting in a holding cell, facing decades in federal prison for embezzlement and conspiracy. Jamal and Dominique were faring much worse. A federal judge had officially denied them bail, citing their direct financial connections to a violent international cartel. They were deemed severe flight risks. Jamal had reportedly wept openly in the courtroom, begging the judge for leniency and blaming his mother for forcing him into the scheme. Dominique had screamed at her public defender, demanding a luxury cell and complaining about the jailhouse uniforms. The Petrovic syndicate had already put a bounty on Jamal's head, making his protective custody unit the only thing keeping him alive. Their wealth was eradicated. Their freedom was gone. Their precious social status was permanently incinerated. They were the biggest disgrace the city had seen in a decade. The low hum of a heavy engine pulled my attention away from the screen. A sleek black town car pulled into my driveway, rolling to a smooth stop behind my custom-armored Maybach. Darius stepped out of the back seat. He wore a simple gray suit, completely stripped of the flashy accessories Dominique had always forced him to wear. He looked tired, but the heavy, suffocating weight that had always dragged down his shoulders was noticeably absent. He walked over to me, stopping near the hood of my Maybach. "You wanted to see me, Nia?" he asked, his voice quiet and respectful. I placed my tablet on the hood of the car and picked up a thick manila folder. I opened it, pulling out the final divorce decree. The federal prosecutors had expedited the process given Jamal's incarceration and the sheer volume of his financial fraud. I grabbed a gold pen, signed my name on the dotted line, and closed the folder with a satisfying snap. I was officially free. I slid the folder toward Darius. Then I reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulling out a heavy ring of keys and a sealed silver envelope. "These are for you," I said, tossing the keys onto the hood of the Maybach. Darius stared at the envelope, his mouth falling open in shock. He looked at the keys gleaming against the sleek black paint of the Maybach, and then back up to my face. He shook his head slowly, stepping back as if the envelope was going to burn him. "Nia, I cannot take this. My wife tried to destroy you. She belittled you at every turn and used my business to launder money that almost got you killed. I stood by and let her disrespect you for years because I was too weak to stop her. I do not deserve this kind of grace. Dominique is not your responsibility, Darius." I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You proved your loyalty when you stepped up to that microphone at the gala and told the truth. You sacrificed yourself to stop her, knowing it would cost you everything. You were the only one in that family who possessed a shred of genuine conscience. I do not forget loyalty, and I do not punish the innocent for the sins of the guilty." I picked up the silver envelope and pressed it firmly against his chest, forcing his hands to close around it. "Those are the keys to the Southside dealership," I explained, crossing my arms over my chest. "When the feds seized Dominique's assets, they liquidated the remaining inventory at the dealership. I bought the commercial property out of foreclosure this morning through my corporate holding company. The deed is in that envelope. It is legally yours free and clear. Take the property, Darius. Rebuild the dealership from the ground up. Hire good people, treat them well, but build something honest this time." He gripped the envelope tightly, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He bowed his head, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Thank you, Nia. You are a better person than any of us deserved." I offered him a small, brief smile. "Just make sure the accounting is clean, Darius. I will be checking." I watched him drive away before turning to my head of security, who was standing silently by the driver's side door of the Maybach. "It is time to go, Marcus." We drove to the private aviation terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in comfortable silence. The tarmac was bathed in the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. A pristine white Gulfstream jet sat waiting on the runway, the engines humming softly in preparation for takeoff. I climbed the folding stairs, stepping into the luxurious cabin of the aircraft. The interior was outfitted in rich cream leather and polished mahogany. A flight attendant took my blazer, offering a polite professional bow. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Hayes," she said. "It is just Nia now," I corrected gently, taking my seat by the large oval window. She nodded, pouring me a glass of top-tier vintage champagne. I took the crystal flute, letting the cool, crisp liquid coat my throat. I looked out the window as the plane began to taxi down the runway, the sprawling skyline of Atlanta shrinking into the distance. I thought back to the woman I was just a year ago, the quiet, dutiful daughter-in-law who sat at the end of the Sunday dinner table, taking their insults and swallowing their abuse. The naive bookkeeper they thought they could manipulate, discard, and frame for their crimes. They had severely underestimated my intelligence, my patience, and my absolute refusal to be a victim. The jet lifted off the ground, banking smoothly through the clouds. I leaned back into the plush leather seat, crossing my legs and taking another slow, satisfying sip of champagne. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over my spirit, replacing the constant, hyper-vigilant tension that had defined my life for the past year. I was no longer a pawn in their twisted family game. I was no longer a scapegoat for their financial failures. I was a completely free, wildly successful multimillionaire who had orchestrated the perfect, devastating downfall of the monsters who tried to bury me. I had burned their empire to ash, and from that ash, I had built my own. The sky outside the window shifted into vibrant hues of purple and orange, signaling the end of one chaotic era and the beautiful unwritten dawn of the next.